Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. I am very honored. I'm very excited to sit down. I'm watching Hulk Hogan's Real American documentary on Netflix. We're going to go through this, like how the McMahon documentary, probably about a year ago. This is a non-WWE documentary. It's a wrestling fan's look at Terry Bollea. It is his last chance to tell his story during the making of this documentary. He passed away. You can tell that there are shots that they went out and got after he's passed away. Many of his friends they're speaking about him in the past tense as he's not around anymore. And this episode right here is about the rise of Hulk Hogan. If you are a non-wrestling fan and you are just jumping in to see what this documentary is about, this documentary episode is the one that honestly you should skip. This is from his birth, him living in Tampa, what he was like as a kid, what it was like with him, being in a band, about him dropping out of high school, getting kicked out of the house, him figuring out that he wanted to try to become a professional wrestler. One of the best parts of this documentary was when it clicked what professional wrestling really was. I really liked the way that they rolled it out. They didn't just come out and slap you in the face and say professional wrestling is fake. They told the story about him going to the matches and him actually figuring it out. And him realizing that he didn't have to be a tough guy. All of these professional wrestlers that he was scared of. He kind of realized that they were normal people and that he actually could do this. But this, honestly, episode 1 is the most skippable episode. I'm really looking forward to getting into episode 2. That one is entitled Hulkamania. It is the birth of Hulk Hogan in the WWF. This episode ends with him actually calling Vince McMahon Jr. to get his job back after he's going to leave the AWA to go to the WWF, where he was fired by Vince's father for going to make Rocky III. This documentary, it opened up with Hulk Hogan's funeral. They actually have footage of, the wrestlers and friends and family at the funeral. We see Big Show. We see Dennis Rodman, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. We actually see the casket in the front of the room. There's a really artistic, close up, sort of draw in kind of look of like, this is what Hulk Hogan is now. This is his life. This is everything until this point. So many times with WWF documentaries, I've talked about the fact that WWE would release documentaries before the story was over. We got the Shawn Michaels Heartbreak and Triumph before his retirement match against The Undertaker. We got the Rock's profile before the Rock versus Cena deal. So many times we don't really get a complete story. And the last John Cena documentary was 2010. Randy Orton's last documentary was 2011. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that hasn't really been covered. So, the first time we actually see Hulk Hogan it's hard to say this, in present day, Hulk Hogan is down in his gym, which is in the basement of his house, and he's working out. He's working out like it's the 80s or the 90s, and he's having really no problem just lifting these big, heavy weights. But then he tells you, like at the end of his reps, the hardest part is actually the part where he stops and he stands up. And his hands don't work like they used to. He can't open the water bottles. He has to get Nick, his son, to come down to the gym and open up his water bottle so that he has something to drink. But it's kind of a look of what like Hulk Hogan is doing, is like his body is starting to fail him, and his body is what kind of made him the success that he was. But Hulk Hogan sits down in front of the camera and he describes to us that Hulk Hogan is a fake character. Hulk Hogan is two different people, and he tells us the difference between Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea. And immediately, I think back to the Gawker case. I believe it was the Gawker case when the trial was going on, and they were trying to get to the bottom of the sex tape being released online, and what the penalty was going to be. And that's when Terry Bollea rolled out that Hulk Hogan is a man with a 10-inch penis, but Terry Bollea himself doesn't have a 10-inch penis. So by showing this sex tape, it revealed that he is not the character, and it killed the character of Hulk Hogan. That is the actual court case. I'm sure that we are going to get to it more than likely in episode 4, which I believe is the last episode of the documentary, when this thing's coming to an end. It's going to be crazy to see how much time they really spend on that. But there's Terry Bollea, there's Hulk Hogan. We see Linda Hogan, and she's kind of like flipping through a lot of the old, photo albums of, Terry and her as they're, being together in their life. And before the documentary pressed play, I was kind of sitting on the couch trying to make sure I was getting ready. I was getting some sodas. I was getting a bag of chips that the dog ate when I walked away. But there's a lot of footage of, like, in the commercially thing, of Linda Hogan talking to the camera, almost like she does now when she posts the Twitter videos and Instagram videos of her crying to the camera all the time, or yelling at her birds or whatever the heck, But there's footage of her like with a camcorder recording herself. There's one time when it looks like she's trying to get away from some sort of storm that is coming, probably a hurricane or something like that that's going to hit the coast of Florida. And I'm just wondering, like, how much does she film herself? And like, was this a reality show for herself before the reality show, or could she just not come to the realism that the reality show is over and she's still filming herself? I think that Linda might need a documentary once this is all said and done. But Hogan grew up in Tampa. He said he hated living in those conditions. I don't remember if he said that his family was poor or not, but his father was a construction worker. Back in those days, I don't think his mom more than likely worked. He told a story later about, being able to come home and his mom took care of him, but then he had to leave before his father got home from work because they didn't really have the best relationship. But, growing up in Tampa, he was a normal kid. He would watch TV, and that's when he first saw Florida Championship Wrestling. And his first love there was the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. My first thought was Dusty Rhodes a lot older than I thought he was? Hulk Hogan is sort of crediting that Dusty Rhodes was his favorite wrestler when he was watching and he was getting in. Ric Flair talks about the fact that when he got into wrestling, he wanted his name to be Rick Rhodes, that he wanted to be just like Dusty. And, both of these guys would go on to have matches against Dusty. And was Dusty just a lot older than I really thought he was? Of course, Dusty Rhodes is Cody's dad. But he was growing up. He said he was like the fat kid. He started playing baseball. He wasn't great at that, so he moved over to bowling. But what he really found out that he was really good at was playing music, and he would play the bass guitar. He started joining a band and just playing music. Through that, he dropped out of high school, and his father, kicked him out of the house, and he was, basically living in a hotel, doing what he had to do to make money. It kind of sounded like he was playing the bass in bands, or maybe he was even just working at clubs that had music at them, and he would see the wrestlers when they came to town, like Superstar Billy Graham or Brian Blair, and they groomed him into getting into professional wrestling by helping him, come to the matches. And that's when he saw Steve Kern, and he was watching Steve Kern wrestle in a match. And Steve Kern looked at the heel and actually told him, like, hit me. Hogan saw this from his seats, and that's when the light flicked. Like, oh, this isn't real. And I loved the way they told the story here, because they could have just tried to explain to you like you are a brand new wrestling fan who didn't really understand. And, this is like a movie, this is a comic book, it's played out in real life. But, Hulk Hogan told us the way that he really found out about the business. From there, he went down to the Dungeon, which is a training school in Tampa. I thought it was Brutus Beefcake. He talked about, going to train with him, but I don't think it was him, because the next shot I saw of this guy, he wasn't hunched over, he wasn't overweight, he was wearing like these weird looking glasses. It might have just been like one of Hulk Hogan's old friends from back in the day, because they didn't really flash the name up there or show highlights of somebody like they did every single time they introduced a character, like the Jesse Ventura or Bret the Hitman Hart, Dusty Rhodes. I would think that Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a WWE Hall of Famer, would get some sort of flash into this. But, basically he got into the wrestling school. He was doing well. He was talking, some trash, telling everybody that he was going to be a professional wrestler. The word got back to the actual trainer, and the trainer just took him and broke his leg. They don't mention the trainer's name. From being a real, Hulk Hogan fan and seeing this in other documentaries and other, videos and things like that, the trainer's name is Hiro Mashida. I don't know why they don't mention him by name. If either it was a Hogan lie that it was Hiro Mashida and it wasn't him in the long run, or maybe there's just beef between Machida and Hogan, and Hogan didn't want to, shine some light on him. I'm sure at this point he's passed on, but I thought it was kind of weird that they didn't mention him by name. But Hogan started wrestling actual matches once he got his leg fixed, and he started going to the school again. It showed him that it showed the people at the school that he really wanted to be a part of this. They started getting him booked as the Super Destroyer. He would wrestle underneath the match because he was still so green. They didn't want to ruin him by, exposing who he was. And so they let him wrestle under a mask until he sort of, got better as it went along. Now, they kind of showed you the map of the United States, and they broke down, at that time, there was different territories in the United States. People think about it like New York, Philadelphia. He was down in Florida. You had World Class and all kinds of other things like that for you. But they kind of explained it like it was the mob, and you didn't travel over the lines. But what it was really like is that you would get yourself booked. You wanted to spend about 7 weeks in each territory and then move on to be able to do something fresh. So that way you were always kind of like moving and learning. Terry, he moved from Tampa to Memphis, where he would, first start wrestling under the name Terry Boulder. And there he meets Jimmy Hart in Memphis. Jimmy Hart credits Jerry the King Lawler and Hulk Hogan as two of the names that got him into professional wrestling, that made him the star that he once was. Jerry Lawler, who went to school with Jimmy Hart in high school. They were buddies. They were in the wrestling business in Memphis, and Jerry brought Jimmy Hart out and showed him who Hulk Hogan was. They watched him wrestle a match. Jimmy thought, the guy was huge. He was very big. Obviously, Jerry Lawler was impressed by Hogan, or why would he really be showing him off? But Jerry Lawler was asked to manage Hulk Hogan. I'm guessing they're not talking about like a Bobby Heenan, Jimmy Hart, the Genius style manager. I think maybe Hogan was asking him to like be his real life like manager of like bookings and things like that. And Jerry turned him down, thinking that he was just another big guy that was going to get into the business, and there was no way that he was ever going to make a dime. And Jerry Lawler was 100% wrong. We go to there from Jerry Lawler to meeting Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret Hart said that he had wrestled Hogan in Atlanta a few times, and he was a very bad wrestler. Bret Hart is not portrayed well in this documentary. He has a speaking point. I think there's going to be a really big thing about WrestleMania 9 to SummerSlam 1993, which I really want to see explained why Bret would join the NWO and WCW and do so much stuff, being Hogan's lackey in 1997. Maybe just Bret knew that he had signed with WCW. They were paying him money. He had to show up. He's going to do whatever they say. It could just be that easy. Maybe just Bret's going to say he gave up, but I don't know if it's ever going to be brought up. But it doesn't make sense how Bret basically talked about how better of a wrestler he was than Hogan. Hogan didn't really care about this, blah, 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 blah. All he had was a bear hug. But then Bret says that's all he really needed, because he was one of the best promos in the business. He was going to fall back on his size, and that's all it really was. Around this time, he starts being referred to as the Hulk, Terry Bollea, using that. I don't know if Hulk came up with that name on his own. When does Marvel come for their cut? Because they make it seem like they got the Hulk Hogan, they got the Hulk name on their own. I don't really know. This is probably like 1978, 1979. Obviously, the Hulk is out there, though, the comic book. But I don't really know how big it was at that time. But he gets a call from Vince McMahon Sr., who is running the New York territory, which is one of the biggest ones in the country. It houses New York City, Madison Square Garden, and Hogan goes to work there. He has his first match against Ted DiBiase. He looks like he's going to have a big, bright future. But Sylvester Stallone is flipping through the TV one night and sees Hulk Hogan and says, I want this guy to be in my next movie, Rocky III, where he's going to play Thunder Lips. And, Hulk tells Vince Sr. that he's going to L.A., he's going to be in this movie, and then he'll be back. But Vince Sr. says, no, you got to go to Charlotte, you got to do TV, you got to be there in the morning. You do this movie, you're done. So Vince Sr. is basically putting it out there like it's either wrestle for the WWF or Rocky III. Hulk, I think he takes the right light. I think he picked the right tunnel, and he goes and does Rocky III. And when you watch Rocky III, it's not the biggest part. Everybody always says that like it, is the biggest part of the movie. It's like the first 5 minutes where basically Rocky is fighting in an exhibition. It's a fundraiser for a boys club where a boxer is going to fight against a wrestler, and they make Hulk Hogan look all big and jacked. When I watched this movie in the past, I always thought that Hulk Hogan was WWF Hulk Hogan. I always thought this was around the era of like WrestleMania 3. I thought that's where it was, but this is actually like 1978, because once Hogan does the movie, he gets fired by Vince. He stays in L.A. because he gets pulled onto the Johnny Carson show. I don't know if he maybe thinks that like he's going into the world of acting, but he just gets this like, I'm going to Minnesota. I'm going to go wrestle for Vern Gagne in the AWA. But I really don't know why Hulk Hogan would go on the Johnny Carson show when he just had a cameo in Rocky 3. Why would Carson bring him on? That's the part that really doesn't make sense to me. I guess I just don't understand how big of a star Hulk Hogan really was. Maybe from his time in WWF, he was a bigger star than I thought he was. Like, we always see that match against him and Andre at Chase Stadium. But we'll see. But Hulk Hogan, after Johnny Carson, he goes out on the town. That's where he meets Linda at her bar for the very first time. She had just saw Rocky 3 at the movie theaters the day before, so it was crazy. But Hulk gets this idea. They move to Minnesota. She comes with, and that's where we meet Jesse Ventura. And I was really, really shocked because when they put Hogan and Andre into the Hall of Fame at WrestleMania 42, one of the things I said was, like, who is going to say anything positive about Hulk Hogan at the Hall of Fame? Jesse Ventura is about the only person alive. Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse were the commentators. Hogan has passed away. Andre's passed away. Bobby the Brain Heenan has passed away. Jesse's pretty much the only one there. But I was really surprised that Jesse came in and he didn't say a bunch, but he said more than I thought he would. He told the story of Hogan coming in and wrestling against Jesse Ventura, and he was supposed to be a bad guy, but the people turned Hulk, and they basically got behind him, and that's when Hogan started like changing his mannerisms of how he spoke and how he did his promos, and the people pushed him, and he was sitting back trying to really find, like, what is this character? What is this character? What is it's going to find it? And at that time, like, in the world of wrestling, like, the Russians were looked down on, the Japanese wrestlers, like, patriotism honestly was very, very big. So we see Hogan start coming to the ring with the big oversized American flag and, just pushing and pushing. And that's basically when Vince Jr. gets Hulk on the phone and, tells him, like, he really likes the things that he's been doing with his character. He's taken over New York from his father, and he wants him to come in to biggest stars. And that is where episode 1, The Rise, ends. And we're going to episode 2, entitled Hulkamania. Get to it. All right. We're into episode 2. This was entitled Hulkamania. I will tell you that starting this off, this is the episode of all episodes. Should be one of the biggest and best episodes that covers me growing up. Like, all of my greatest memories of Hulk Hogan should have been in this episode. And they weren't there. I'm really worried about this documentary and what I think it's going to be based off of this. We got 2 more episodes. It looks like one of them is going to cover him becoming a bad guy, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and then the last episode, Hulk versus Terry. Now, I know that this is trying to cover his wrestling life as well as his regular life. They really confused us right out of the gate when they say that this is the Hulk Hogan Real American documentary. And then they tell us that this is 2 different people, Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. Is this a documentary about his Terry Bollea life or the Hulk Hogan life? Because we really hit hard Hulk Hogan, but we're skipping a lot of stuff. We start this out with Linda and Hulk break up. Basically, Linda thinks that she ruined her shot with Hulk. Hulk hasn't called in about 3 weeks, and she's just kind of waiting for the call for Hulk Hogan to break up with her. And all of a sudden, after about 3 weeks, Hogan calls and says that he's in Oakland and he needs her to come see him. And she thinks that this is like going to be the last time that she sees Hulk, but she flies up to Oakland, picks her up at the airport. They go straight to the hotel. They don't really say anything along the way. They go into the hotel room. Hulk sits on the end of the bed and basically portrays his love for Linda, saying that he can't live without her, and he wants her in his life. And they jump right in to basically going and getting married. But because of where we left off and where we are in the Hulk Hogan story, basically there's no time for a honeymoon. There's no time for basically anything, because Hogan is packing his bags and he's moving to New York in more ways than one. He's joining the WWF with Vince McMahon, and they are portraying him to be the real American hero. He is going to be, player number one for this for this territory. And they show Hulk going to a storage unit, just like you and me, keeping your extra things that you don't have room for in your house or in your garage. I thought of the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast guys, Matt Cardona and Brian Myers. They have a storage unit for their extra toys that they don't keep in their house, that they don't want to get rid of. Who would have thought Hulk Hogan would be just public storage, opening up his unit, going through his memories? But basically, they dig through and they find a briefcase in there, and he opens it up, and it just happens to be his travel notes and his calendar, and he points at the date on the calendar: Madison Square Garden, WWF debut, versus Iron Sheik. Now, I don't want to be a stickler, but Hulk Hogan's debut in the WWF was being brought in by Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund had lost the title to the Iron Sheik. Bob Backlund was getting beat up by the Iron Sheik, and he brought out Hulk Hogan to equal the odds. Now, that was Bob Backlund giving the rub to Hulk Hogan so that he could come into the territory and be the new Bob Backlund. For one reason or another, Bob Backlund's run was coming to an end. I know of the 1994 WrestleMania 9, WrestleMania 10 Bob Backlund, the guy who would never go away, that was running for Senate. I, as a kid, believed he really was running for president. He really was running for I didn't really understand that was his wrestling gimmick, because he just always seemed to be around. But Hogan comes in, he makes his debut at the Garden. They portray it as he's coming down the ring to fight the Iron Sheik. In 1984, the Iranian War is going on, and it is on every channel. Ronald Reagan is trying his best to get involved in this whole deal, and they know right off the bat this is going to be a hot angle. Hulk Hogan cannot fail. This is going to be shooting him to be one of the biggest wrestling stars that there is in the country. And Vince has got his idea in his mind for, basically worldwide domination. This territory things has to really go. But right out of the gate in the match, Hogan jumps Iron Sheik. He says that it was not the plan. It just happened to be nerves that kind of got him. And, Hogan beats the Iron Sheik. He becomes the new champion. It just happens to be that the night that Hogan's family, his mom and dad, came to see him wrestle at Madison Square Garden. His dad sees him win the championship, and it's kind of a closing moment for the family where Hogan's dad acknowledges that maybe, him being hard on him for dropping out of high school to join the band, and then him, start to train to be a wrestler. He made the right decision, and then it's paid off. He's at the top of the business. He can't really go any farther than what this is. So with Hogan as the champion and the mainstay of the company, Vince launches WrestleMania of 1985. We see Vince reaching out to the celebrity ranks. We see Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T come in. Mr. T, who is the A-Team, the world's biggest, best bouncer from NBC. He's just everywhere at this time. As big as you think Hulk Hogan is, honestly, Mr. T is probably bigger. Hulk Hogan didn't get his cereal until like 1991. Mr. T had his cereal in the 80s. With everybody going to the store and getting their bowl of Mr. T's. Now, an answer that I never really thought of until this point is Hogan says the original idea for WrestleMania was Piper and Orndorff. As we know, Orndorff is kind of like pushed to the outside and replaced by Bob Orton. I never really thought about this, but why was Mr. Wonderful just kind of like the outside help that fought against, Jimmy Snuka, that brought him into the outside? Why was Orton in the match? Did Paul Wonderful, did he get some sort of injury where he couldn't wrestle the match? I mean, Bob Orton was in there fighting and he had a broken what did he have? A broken arm? A broken hand? I don't really know what the storyline was, why he was wearing the cast all of the time. But it's the biggest match of all time that you can think of. It really launched the territory up into the next dimension. Shortly right before WrestleMania, Vince called Hulk and told him that he needed to go do a television show called Hot Properties with Richard Benzer. When Hogan said he didn't want to do it, Vince told him that there was sick kids in wheelchairs that were going to be a part of the show. Hulk got there. He, quickly realizes that there are no sick kids. It's just him doing a TV show. And Richard Benzer is a comedian who's kind of like portraying wrestling as being fake and that he's bigger and he could hurt Hulk. Hulk choked him out on live TV, just like this. Boom. And Benzer hits the floor. Shortly after that, Richard Benzer serves Hulk Hogan with a $500,000 lawsuit, and Linda Hogan is going crazy, basically saying that we got this lawsuit for $500,000 when we're basically living on $3,500 a month. I went to my computer and I looked it up as she was talking. I'm not the biggest Linda Hogan fan, and I was like, how much money in today's money is $3,500 in 1984? That's $10,741 today. I think we all could make do on that a month. But she made it seem like they were living in poverty as they were living in Stamford, Connecticut. Even the worst apartment in Stamford, Connecticut is way better than living in most places around the world. But their luck would quickly change. This WrestleMania thing really took off to the point where people were paying $100 to get into WrestleMania. Kerry Silken, the original guy from Ring of Honor, he called into the Hulkamania, Wrestling Anonymous podcast. He told this really good story about greasing the palm of one of the ushers to get into WrestleMania. And, it's probably one of my favorite WrestleMania stories from somebody just going to see WrestleMania. And, for the people saying that they were going crazy about, paying $100 to get into the Garden, my tickets to WrestleMania 27 in the hundreds section, not the dollars, but the first bowl of fans. I'm not sitting on the floor, but I'm sitting in the hundreds. That was $100. from WrestleMania 28, we paid $800. And then it like continuously kind of went up from there to the $1,400 it cost me to sit in the hundreds at WrestleMania 41. But wrestling was never the same after that. Like, just kept on getting hotter and hotter, better and better. Hulk Hogan was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Linda Hogan comments that they got a call from their bank, their person who looked over their money, that they had $1 million in their bank account. This is somebody who just months ago was complaining that they were only making $3,500 a month. But Hulk, portrayed it as like they get like to WrestleMania 2, that like they're widening, like the people that come to wrestling, more families were coming and bringing their kids. That built them to, be able to do stadiums and bigger arenas for all of their shows. And he went from making $500,000 a year to making $3 to $4 million a year. We hear from Jake Roberts and Jesse Ventura, Bret the Hitman Hart, talking about the fact that Hogan was money. For Jesse Ventura to give a compliment to Hulk Hogan about anything is huge. And he even says, like, you have to give credit where credit is due. Bret the Hitman Hart talked about the fact that, like, people begged to be on Hogan's cards because you knew that they were going to be sold out. You knew that that meant your check for your match was going to be bigger just because of the fact there was more fans into there. But as they started to make more money, they started to spend more money and raise hell. It's where they kind of got into having a party lifestyle, and they talk about cocaine being brought into the situation. Jake Roberts talks about them living their lives like they're going 90 miles an hour. But something that kind of struck Hogan to the point where he kind of like wanted to change his life was one day his brother Alan, who was older than him, who had sort of left home early to get into a biker gang, and showed up on his doorstep asking for help, trying to get into a rehab. He had just rode too hard. They were doing too many drugs. They were drinking too much. And, he wants to help his brother, but he also has to go out on the road and he has to work. He thinks that if he gives his brother money, that it'll fix his situation. He'll be able to get into the rehab he wants to go to. Hogan goes off to work and his brother dies. It's his first, real setback in his life that he's lost his brother. They weren't close. They weren't the closest, but still, that's like your blood that you grew up with, and you don't want to lose somebody like that. At the same time, Hogan is becoming the biggest celebrity that there is in the world. They're talking about the fact that, these Make-A-Wish kids are starting to ask, for to meet Hulk instead of meeting their sports heroes, or go see Mickey Mouse or anything else out there. He's meeting one at a time, he's meeting two at a time, and then quickly it's snowballing into that is his day to go out there, just trying to give hope to these kids that they don't have long, but they want to believe in something, and they're believing in Hulk Hogan. But the big problem comes at WrestleMania 3, the match that got put into the WWE Hall of Fame this year. It's Hulk going up against Andre. We all know the story about, Andre had never been beaten. Andre had never been slammed. He was kind of like Hogan's partner on a lot of house shows where they made it portrayed as they were the best of friends, but Bobby Heenan was able to get into Andre's ear, basically telling him that Hogan's never going to give you a shot. You're way better than him. Look at the size of your trophy compared to the size of his trophy. You guys aren't equals. He thinks he's better than you. And we get the big match. Pontiac Silverdome, 93,000 fans went out of their way to go see WrestleMania that day. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. And Hogan comes out. He does what's never been done before. He slams Andre. He pins Andre. and we're off to the races. But I don't really know what they did between WrestleMania 3 to WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5. I know that Hogan, takes some time off to go make a movie, No Holds Barred, but they don't really portray any of that. But as I'm kind of like in my head, like trying to figure out what they're skipping, President Donald Trump shows up. Not like the taped interview from back in the day, a real life live interview in the Oval Office. As Trump's sitting down, he says he has a meeting with Russia, but he chose to do this documentary. And it's like, what the hell is going on? No matter what you think of President Trump, that's the president. And the president is sitting down to talk with them about Hulk Hogan and WrestleMania 4, WrestleMania 5 at Trump Plaza. What it was like to know Hulk, and he's doing the Hogan finger, and then like he realizes he's doing the Hogan figure, and he has to stop doing it because he's the president. But I just couldn't believe it. But they talk about how big Hulk was at this time with the merchandising. He brings up underwear and bed sheets, different figures. I think he starts talking about a figure that they made for him in WCW, the one that shook, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe they tried to make that for him back in the 80s, and it didn't really work out. But WCW got the brawlers that they were able to shake. But he also shows these toilet chairs for kids to learn to go to the bathroom. That was weird. Never had one of those. Never seen one of them. Don't want one of those in my collection either. But Hogan and Linda, they have baby Brooke. And then right after that, Linda just stops taking her birth control. And in 1990, Nick shows up. It's not the end of the world. Hogan was really happy that he had a boy. He decided that, he's doing these 2 weeks at a time where he's doing 12 days on the road, 2 days at home. It's hard to be a father. And he decides to go to Vince and say he's ready to start winding this down to be like a part-time deal that he doesn't want to be full-time. But Vince is like, how do I fill these cards? I need main events in St. Louis. I need main events in Cincinnati. And they sort of point out one guy that's getting a connection with the crowd, the Ultimate Warrior. And this becomes the Ultimate Warrior diss track. What was that? The Destruction of Ultimate Warrior Part 2. For everything at WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans that, Hogan said that he went out of his way to apologize to the Warrior, make everything right. That's out the window. This isn't a WWE documentary, but I say a lot of things about Hogan that, he's my favorite, but you can sift through a lot of the stuff he says. How can he not realize, even at his age, the negative things that he's saying they're going to spin and use as headlines for this documentary? He just basically says, it's not a good plan. It was the worst idea of all time. WrestleMania 6, Warrior vs. Hogan, is one of the biggest matches that WWE has ever done. They sold out the Toronto Sky Dome, a brand new arena up in Canada. That was huge. Hogan puts Warrior over. Hogan's saying that Warrior wanted to end the match 3 minutes in. Hogan decided that it wasn't a good idea, that he guided him through the rest of the match. We have the talking heads of Jake the Snake Roberts, Bret the Hitman Hart, Bruce Pritchard. Just like the destruction of Warrior DVD. It's not that. They got new clips. But they make it seem like they ended the Warrior run because it just was not working. 1991 Royal Rumble. Warrior loses to Slaughter. Warrior loses to Slaughter because Hogan is going to fight Slaughter because they're going to run this Operation Desert Storm angle and they wanted to be just like the Iron Sheik versus Hulk Hogan. They want the Iraqi sympathizer Sergeant Slaughter going up against Hulk. Could they have done, Warrior in the red, white, and blue, which he had wore the Rumble 1991? He was wearing the USA leather jacket. Yes, but then what do you do with Hogan? Do you do Hogan versus Savage, which you've already done at WrestleMania 5? Do you do it again at WrestleMania 7? That doesn't sound like the best idea. Plus, you're thinking of retiring Randy Savage so he can go off and start his family because he's ready to wind down his career. That doesn't really make the most sense. And then even if you just use the WrestleMania card, they come out of that into SummerSlam 1991 and they build up Warrior and Hogan as a tag team going up against Slaughter, Adnan, and the Iron Sheik. I can't remember what their names were. So the match made in hell. How the hell do you say that this is the worst idea of all time and the Warrior was a horrible guy? They wanted him to be a main eventer, but Warrior wanted more money that Vince didn't want to pay him. Warrior held Vince up for money. Vince fires him. That's why this didn't work, and that's why Warrior got off track. If Warrior would have stayed, took the money that Vince wanted to pay him, Vince would have gave him the money that he wanted, I think Warrior would have continued on and he would have won the championship back, because WrestleMania 7 with Hogan versus Slaughter, it didn't work. That's coming from one of the biggest Hulkamania fans that there is out there. Hulk says that they should have found a new star in the 90s. And immediately after that, they run a clip of like a kid at a show. And they're asking him, like, what about Hulk? And the kid just blatantly says, Hulkamania is going to die. I don't know where we're going. I know where we're going. We're going to Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So this is quickly going to shift from WrestleMania 6 to WCW, which would be around the time of WrestleMania 13. So we're really time warping next episode. I'll tell you the truth, as of right now, I don't have the highest hopes for this documentary. I hope that we land the plane in episode 4 and talk about the end of his life and hopefully get to a lot of stuff that I'm hoping that they're going to cover. But at this point, I know they got the Warrior. I'm sorry. I know that they got the Vince one done in 4. I wish this would have been at least 5 to 6. That's just me. See where we get to. We're live, pal. What is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. Last night was honestly a really long night at the Breach House. Watched episode 1, made a review. Watched episode 2, made a review. Watched episode 3, and I made a game time decision that basically I was going to watch episode 4, and then I was going to go to bed. Episode 4 was the longest of the 4. And when it was all said and done, I believe it was after 10 o'clock. I can't remember the last time I really stayed up after 10. And making 2 videos and uploading them didn't really sound that appetizing to have to get up at 4:15 in the morning, go to work, and have a productive day, because I already knew that my boss's boss was going to be coming in, and those days are always stressful because you want to make them look honestly as good as you can. But here we are, basically home from work. Thursday kicks off my weekend. We got the NFL draft coming up at 5. And it's going to be a good night. So basically we're going to bang this out. We're going to make a review of episode 3, episode 4, give my final thoughts on the documentary, and then just have one hell of a weekend. Let's start from there. So episode 3 was entitled Hollywood Hogan. It was by far the best episode of the 4. I don't want to say that it was because of the NWO. It just happened to be a time period that was very exciting in Hulk's life. It kind of was one of the few revivals for me as a wrestling fan was, him going to WCW, doing the leg drop on Savage during Bash at the Beach, being so shocked of seeing something that I had never really seen before. And then the way that they kept the Hulk Hogan NWO storyline going for, we'll say it was 2 years, maybe roughly 3 years before it got pretty freaking stale. And you didn't really know why WCW would kill off the NWO. I mean, that's one of the biggest stories of my life, is that why didn't um, you know, WCW kill this off? Is it because they needed the t-shirt sales, they needed the revenue of as Kevin Nash got into being a singles guy and he was wearing the NWO gear, that like that was a lot of revenue that they couldn't just cut off to start another storyline, another brand, and maybe see something continue. But like they just used it. Like when Goldberg, got hot, when he dropped the title, they decided like, hey, let's put the belt back on Hollywood Hogan and NWO. And then we have this like built-in storyline. Goldberg's gonna have to start at the bottom, beat Steiner, then he's got to beat Hall, then he's gonna have to beat Nash, and then he's got a shot at Hulk. But they never had really a chance to do it. So let's get started with this. Episode 3, it started at WrestleMania 8, and that March to WrestleMania USA special that they did with Vince sitting down with Hulk Hogan, and Hulk basically saying that he thinks this is it. Like he thinks that WrestleMania is going to be his last one. He's going to give his shot to try out to go to Hollywood. He wants to go make a few movies. I think he already had No Holds Barred, which I know he was making in between WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5. He had done Suburban Commando. I think he is either going to make Mr. Nanny or he is making Mr. Nanny currently at this time. He doesn't want to quit wrestling. He just wants to go part-time. He wants to be what Roman Reigns is today, basically, where he can raise his family, be home, see Linda, see Nick, see Brooke, and not really, give up not getting a paycheck. Once we get the open to episode 3 and we're off and running, the storyline that they give to us is Hulk Hogan rolling out the Hulk Hogan's vitamin line. In my mind, I always thought that like say your prayers, take your vitamins, was Hulk Hogan's thing from the very beginning. But this made me really think that Hogan started that tagline because of the fact they were launching the Hulk Hogan chewable vitamin, that I think it was just a copy and paste of the Flintstones vitamin, which might still be going strong today. I don't really know. I don't even know if kids know who the Flintstones are. As I was a young kid, the Flintstones were barely out there. I remember they made that, sort of like straight to video movie, The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones. And that was kind of like their last hurrah, other than like when the dude from Roseanne made the live action Flintstones movie. The first one was a hit. And then the second one really killed the franchise. I don't even think they've ever really touched it again, but Hulk Hogan, say your prayers, take your vitamins. They're using this as a setup to start talking about what the major first part of this documentary is basically going to be. And they set it up for Jesse Ventura, who says, like, are we talking about vitamins or are we talking about injectables? It's out there. I mean, everybody knows Hulk Hogan, hand in hand with steroids. At one point, he admitted that he took them for the first, I believe, 18 years of his career. He said he started taking them after high school. And it was very weird. As Hogan is kind of like talking about steroids, we see Hulk Hogan working out in his gym. We saw this earlier in his time, and he talked about, his hands didn't work as well, so Nick had to open up his water bottles for him. But during this time period that we see Hulk working out, it's not even like in the background. They cut to it. Nick's just drinking a beer down there in the gym. I don't know what that cut was for. It didn't really have anything to do with this. They talk about Nick a little bit in episode 4 when talking about Hogan Knows Best, and not really have anything for Nick to do as a storyline on the show, and he was just kind of playing Dennis the Menace, filling in times like shooting water balloons and doing things where they, have the cops would come talk to Hulk, and he never really got a storyline to get a career going, other than I believe the one episode where he was like decided he wanted to start training to be a professional wrestler. But Nick drinking a beer in the gym was a little weird. It was definitely like 2 seconds of filler that I don't really understand why it would be there, but this is all setting up the future steroid trial for Vince McMahon in the WWF, and how Hulk Hogan was kind of the star witness that the United States government was bringing in to sort of like nail the nail in the coffin for them to put Vince McMahon away, because they basically thought Vince was supplying steroids to everybody that was in the WWF. They thought that he was a buyer and seller of everything that was going down. But he on his own, Hulk Hogan goes on to the Arsenio Hall show. One weird thing, Hulk Hogan just flat out says, "I'm the one who got Arsenio Hall his job." I'm not the smartest man in the world, but I think Eddie Murphy is the guy that really helped Arsenio Hall, get his career up off the ground. I don't really know what he did with stand-up comedy before he got there, but it was Arsenio Hall's like few it was Arsenio Hall doing movies with Eddie Murphy that basically got him going to the point where I think they came and they offered him that nighttime talk show. I don't really know what Hulk thinks he did to get there, but there wasn't a lot of Hulk lies. We didn't talk about Hulk and Metallica. We didn't really talk about a Hulk drinking beers, nothing like that. But that was a weird one to kind of throw in there that maybe they left in just as like kind of like a wink and a nod, that like they had to cut a lot of stuff out of like Hulk telling his stories. But basically, Hulk goes on there. He says that he's never done steroids. That's just not who he is, and he's just flat out lying to everybody, because he just wanted this story to kind of like stop and go away, and he had to realize that like there was major implications of going to court and lying, basically saying that he didn't do steroids, and like that. But he feels like he has to do the right thing. So he goes there and he basically says, "Max, now." He basically says that Vince didn't, sell him steroids. There was like a brother relationship where they were friends, and it was like, "Hey, you've got them, I've got them. I'll borrow from you, I'll pay you back." There was never money, traded back and forth. I find it really weird that that Vince McMahon in those early 90 years was doing steroids then. I mean, it's very obvious later on in his life when he's like wrestling Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he's sort of like getting into becoming a wrestler way later in his life. And then even once those days are done and he wants to be on the cover of like Muscle and Fitness, and they're showing how big and buff he is working out at the gym. But like when I think about 90s Vince, I would think of maybe him being in the gym, but I think of him as just being a guy just trying to stay fit. I don't see him really as a guy like trying to be huge and be buff, that he would be doing steroids. But maybe you start small and you just over time, you just build into this really huge thing. But we start this huge storyline of basically Hulk, leaving wrestling after WrestleMania 8. They do the whole thing with Sid, which isn't really talked about. They don't really talk about the Ultimate Warrior coming back because in the last episode, they made Ultimate Warrior sound like he was such a big flop in wrestling that he was fired immediately at the Royal Rumble 1981 when he dropped his championship. But Warrior comes back. And when Hulk leaves to go, try his movie career with The Nanny, WWF has to find somebody to put the belt on. They chose Bret the Hitman Hart, a very talented wrestler. It's been widely talked about that, Bret was kind of chosen because of the fact that he got so much fan mail at the office due to the fact of like the women really liking him and thinking he was one of the hottest dudes out there. And, he was chosen as the guy to sort of take the ball and run with it. He beat Ric Flair up in Canada on a house show. It was on Primetime Wrestling. And, they just kept on, I don't think we were really at the point we were calling it the new generation yet. But, basically Hulk gets an idea. I think Vince wanted him. And Hulk comes back to wrestle at WrestleMania 9. Now, when Hulk gets to, Caesars Plaza, whether they're doing their walkthrough or they're just getting ready for the show or whatever it is, Bret the Hitman Hart, who has shared a locker room in episode 1, when we were talking about Hulk's early career, trying to get him to the WWF to become a big star, Bret the Hitman Hart talked about them, wrestling matches in Atlanta. So Hulk knew who Bret was. But Bret walks up, he tries to shake Hulk's hand, do the brother thing, like, hey, brother. Good to have you here. I think Bret was maybe trying to tell him that it was, a joy to have him, on the show. Bret in episode 2 was one of the many, superstars, Jake the Snake Roberts, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jesse Ventura, that said, when Hulk was on your card, or even better, you were on Hulk Hogan's card, you were going to make more money because of the fact you were on the A show. Hulk's name was going to be enough to sell out, any arena. And when there's more tickets sold, when there's more people in the arenas, your pay is going to be more, even if you're not the guy wrestling against Hulk Hogan, because it all trickles down from the top. Basically, Vince McMahon came up with an idea of putting the belt back on Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 9 because of the fact they were going on a European tour, and they thought that with Hulk back on top, it would kind of push them back. We see this so many times with talking about just Hulk Hogan's career. The fact that they go back to Hulk a lot. They did it in 2002 when Hulk came back to the company, and they got the huge ovation right after and after WrestleMania 18. Then immediately Vince is like, "Hey, we need to put the belt on him and push him to the moon," and that didn't really last that long. Hulk was in the WWF until 2005. He got big buy rates. He got big, merchandise sales and this, that, and the other. He sold DVDs, but I don't think people wanted to see him as the main event of the company. They didn't want to see him as the main dude, but we're getting a little bit ahead of each other. But Vince's decision is that when they leave WrestleMania 9, Hulk is going to be the new champion, and Bret the Hitman Hart is pissed. Bret basically thinks that, from WrestleMania 8 to WrestleMania 9, they really rebuilt the company. They started pushing Bret, and that, the fan base was different. Definitely the fan base had gone down. Definitely by WrestleMania 9. The buy rates weren't as big, the houses weren't as big, but it was a new crop of kids that were watching the show, and they didn't want to see some old guy who their dad talked about as like being like, that guy was the best back in my day. You don't want to see that guy on top. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But that's where the story ends. That's it. Bret the Hitman Hart has talked about it. It's wild. It's lore. I remember the WWF magazine. Bret versus Vince. I'm sorry, Bret versus Hulk. They had like a little standoff on the WWF magazine. They were kind of holding the belt like it was almost like a tug of war. It's widely talked about that SummerSlam, I think it would be 1992. Maybe it was 93. I get a little bit mixed up on going from WrestleMania to the pay-per-view itself of what year they actually are. But it was supposed to be in Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be the champion, Bret the Hitman Hart. No, Bret would actually win the belt from Hulk. It would be kind of like a passing of the torch moment. They don't let Bret talk about any of this. They basically just put it on Vince that it was his decision and he just went with it and that was it. We don't talk about what happened to the company after he made this decision. Hogan would only hold the belt until King of the Ring, which might have been 2 months after WrestleMania. Yokozuna beats him for the championship. He gets it back, and then Hulk just leaves the company after the European tour. He goes off to make Suburban Commando. He thinks he's going to be the next Baywatch star. But this would have been a perfect time for Bret to be able to tell his story. Maybe we'll get a Bret the Hitman Hart documentary one day where he tells it on that. But if Bret was going to be Mr. Boo-hoo, the whole freaking thing is that we called Bret. We got an interview with him to sit down to basically just be the burial of Hulk Hogan of this is bad. This is bad. They could have at least threw him a bone telling him this story of supposedly at King of the Ring, there was a conversation between Bret and Hogan where Bret the Hitman Hart lost his shit because Hulk had been saying I'm going to put you over. I'm going to put you over. And then all of a sudden it comes out he's going to put the belt on Yoko, and Bret the Hitman Hart is never going to get this Hulk Hogan match. That's why I was talking about the other day. It doesn't make sense later on down the road when Bret the Hitman Hart is not working for WWF anymore and he goes to WCW. He ends up becoming Hulk Hogan's lackey. And if Bret hates him so much, why is he just jumping right into the saddle to be his tag team partner? Was Hulk making promises at the time that there'll be a time and a place where Hulk would turn on Bret and they would actually be able to do this match? I think Hulk and Bret wrestled once on Nitro. It's a forgettable match, but I think I have it in my memory. But it didn't really mean anything in the long run. They didn't wrestle for the title. It wasn't a meaningful match. It probably ended in a Nitro disqualification. But I think that's honestly something that they should have done. But they just tell the same story. We've seen that. We've heard this 1,000 times. Hulk is working at the Suburban Commando set, which is being shot near Disney MGM Grand, and the MGM Grand is where WCW is shooting their Saturday show, where basically they're flying everybody in. And Eric Bischoff, who is in charge of WCW, is looking for a way to raise the ratings because he just got this job from Ted Turner that honestly he kind of really didn't deserve. He just kind of wound up with it. Eric Bischoff says he just goes and he shoots the shot, and he just promises to be very well paid, bring him in, be able to basically run the company, do whatever he wants. There's a few people in this documentary that are not brought up by name that don't make sense. In episode 1, we talked about Hiro Mashida, who trained Hulk Hogan, is the guy that broke his leg. They chose not to use his name. I don't know if Ric Flair's name was said the whole documentary. But Ric Flair is the guy that put Eric Bischoff in the room with Hulk Hogan to be able to make the deal. Ric Flair is the guy who cut his salary to give WCW some money back in order to bring Hogan in. Ric Flair is the guy that basically, once they got Hogan in the door, is who put Hogan over to be the champion, to be the main guy in the company. We saw a little bit of the Bash of the Beach match where Hogan makes his debut and Shaquille O'Neal's there, Mr. T's there, but I just don't know why Ric Flair would be somebody who got the boot. Hogan and Flair are two guys that probably did every autograph convention together. The only guys that really understood what it was like to be those guys as big as they were in the wrestling business. But is it just something where, like, you just don't want to put somebody else over who might take your spot on somebody's like Mount Rushmore, and so you don't want to say Rick's name? Doesn't really make sense. We started the documentary talking about the steroid trial, but here we are now that Hogan is in WCW. It's 1994, and Vince McMahon's steroid trial is finally going to court. They're putting the case out there, and then basically Hogan gets up on the stand and they ask him, like, did you ever buy steroids from Vince McMahon? And if Hogan would have said, yeah, he sold them to me all the time, that probably would have been like the biggest thing for the case to put Vince McMahon away, and it probably would have crippled and killed the WWF. Now, they tried to have a succession plan where they had brought in Jerry Jarrett, and he was going to be the guy who ran the company while Vince was in jail. WWF, when they've talked about this on the Bruce Bridger podcast, they basically set up a plan like Vince was going away. I don't think they really thought Vince was going to be able to get off on this. But when Hogan, basically said that, like, there was never a purchase, it was just like a handshake, like, I'll give you mine, you give me yours, and like you kind of like just trade back and forth. Vince got off. And you would think that Vince McMahon would be grateful to Hulk Hogan for everything that he had done in his company, pushing him to the heights of like WrestleMania 1 through WrestleMania 9. But because of the fact that Hogan was working for WCW, the wrestling company down south that was kind of coming for WWF, Vince McMahon, when he did like his press conference right after the show, turned it into like a wrestling promo that he was going in on Hulk Hogan. He was saying things like Hulk Hogan never told the truth. Hulk Hogan lied about steroids. Like, he just got off on steroids. So I think he's using the fact that Hulk Hogan never went on trial for steroids, for that. But, that was like the first thing that gave Hogan the okay. Like, he had sort of felt guilty about going to WCW. But that was the kind of first thing, like if Vince is gonna say that I can't do this and it's going to be a major flop, I'm just gonna run this full force so I can shove it up his butt. Basically saying like, hey, like, I'm still a star in this company. Like, you gave up on me, telling me that we were done. I'm going to show you that we can do this, tenfold, and that's where we're going to go from there. The Bash at the Beach match. Hogan was able to see that he still had something left. That we were off to the races from there. But every match they did with Hogan, he got a little bit staler. Nobody really wanted to see the red and yellow anymore. He wasn't as big as he once was because of the fact that I think he felt like the FBI or somebody was watching him. So his steroids weren't out of control as they were in the early 90s. But something changed for WCW in 1996 when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came into the company as free agents. They did the whole thing with the NWO. If you're watching this, you know who the NWO is. You basically know that they came in making it look like they were still working for Vince and the WWF, and the WWF was trying to run an angle of taking over WCW. And it was fresh, it was hot, for somebody like, if I would be 14 years old, I was hearing the rumors basically telling us like, hey, they don't work for WWF anymore. They work for WCW. They came out and told us, I believe on the Great American Bash show, that I really tuned in to watch, thinking that the Outsiders were going to wrestle, but instead they just had a promo, and then they threw Eric Bischoff through um, a table that was there, and for somebody to put hands on Eric Bischoff, he was almost like Hogan. He was almost like what Vince McMahon was in the 80s. I didn't really know that Eric Bischoff was the guy that was in charge. I thought that he was just one of the head announcers. And, for somebody to just pick up the announcer and throw them through a table, I was like, son of a gun. This is real. Like, I don't know what is going on. Hogan was tired of just like being the good guy stuff. And I think even like Kevin Nash has said, like, Hogan saw that there was money in the Outsiders, and he wasn't going to let that train leave the yard without jumping on it. So at Bash of the Beach, 1996, Hogan does the heel turn that nobody saw coming. I think that we hadn't seen Hulk Hogan wrestle for WCW in a bit. I don't think the last thing he did was the him and Savage wearing black, but he hadn't really done anything huge, for the company in a bit. So he showed up at a show that he wasn't booked on. He came down, he dropped the leg, and it was off to the races from there. Cody Rhodes said that he was at that show with his dad, and basically one of the fondest memories that Cody Rhodes has is that a kid just he overheard a kid telling his dad, like, "Dad, why did he do that?" And then Kevin Nash in today's interview answers the question. He's a bad guy now. And I just thought, honestly, that was awesome. And I've been living this. I've seen that NWO thing. I try to watch it each and every year on its anniversary. I've watched that match. I've watched the documentary. I've seen the clips. I've never noticed that, all the trash that was being thrown in the ring, Mean Gene's nose being busted open. And Hogan talks about it, and they do a close up where they show the blood actually coming down Mean Gene's nose as he's holding the microphone for Hogan, Hall, and Nash. And I think that, honestly, that's one of my favorite things. I'm at the point now, they're about to release the Bash of the Beach 3-pack for the NWO. I want a Mean Gene with a bloody nose. I mean, how do you not have one of those? Because there's going to be people with all of the things that are going to be setting up, the Bash of the Beach kind of like thing with them throwing the trash and the beer cans and everything in there, and then you got to be having Mean Gene with the bloody nose, like holding up the mic. You're not just gonna be able to use some other Mean Gene there, but. From there, Hogan says that, WCW started beating WWF in the ratings. They got them for 83 weeks. He was able to show Vince McMahon, like, hey, you were wrong by letting me go. I still have gas in the tank. And they had guys like Piper. They had guys like Macho Man that Vince had cast aside. And, they were off to the races. We didn't really know what nostalgia was. But, basically that was it. Hogan talks about the fact that because they're off to the races, him being part-time went out the window, and basically he was missing a lot of things at home. They did a very cheap edit, very, very cheap edit, where they talked about Linda, being home alone, raising these kids, having to take, Brooke to music practice and Nick to soccer practice. And they have, they have Hogan sitting with some ladies in the back, and basically, talking with Dennis Rodman. Rodman had actually missed practice for the NBA Finals for the Chicago Bulls, and Hogan just says like, "Hey, it's worth missing practice for." And they're really making it look like Hogan's talking about Nick Hogan's soccer practice. I thought that honestly that was kind of like a little bit of a cheap edit as of right there. Um, I said earlier that there was a Hulk Hogan story. The biggest Hulk Hogan story that I think you can point to in all of this is that basically he tells a story that in 1984, when he is about to beat the Iron Sheik for the WWF Championship in Madison Square Garden, as he goes up for the big leg and he's about to drop it down, his knee is blown out. And he says he wrestles on it until 1999. And that's the first time that he has some sort of a surgery, because he says he was just running so hard that he didn't have to do it. I know that there was acting jobs. He did No Holds Barred in between 4 and 5 when he wasn't around full time. He did Mr. Nanny. He did Suburban Commando. There was times when he wasn't wrestling, but he was doing the TV show. You're telling me there was no time to get this knee fixed between 1984 and 1999? You worked, you lived, you did everything on a blown out knee for 15 years? You're out of your mind. But basically, once he gets his knee fixed, I remember it was at Spring Stampede, I believe. The show was up in, it was either in Seattle or Vancouver, and it was a 4-way. And I think it was Ric Flair wrapped Hogan's knee around the ring barricade thing in the corner, the turnbuckle, and they carried Hogan out, and that was like Hulk Hogan, missing time for an injury being explained. One of the first times in his career that he was kind of taken out that way. He wasn't like squashed like or earthquake in 1990. Honestly, would have been a real good storyline. But when he comes back from the knee, he goes on Jay Leno and he basically says that he's running for president of the United States. And I did not see it coming. I really thought that they were just telling the story of him running for president, because that was a gimmick that he used from the Tonight Show to kind of relaunch him coming back to WCW, to the point that's why he was at Atlanta in the Georgia Dome, where he ended up, being in the right place at the right time, that they weren't going to be able to do the Goldberg versus Kevin Nash rematch from Starrcade. So Nash basically says that he wants to fight Hollywood Hulk Hogan that night, and that's why they have the championship shot. And that becomes what the finger poke of doom was. That Kevin Nash, at this point today, he kind of says the finger poke of doom is one of the best things that he's ever pulled off in wrestling, because it was able to get the band back together. As an NWO fan, honestly, I was really excited by it. I really liked it. I thought it was really, really good stuff. But I understand it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people think that WCW died, because they were just running bad storylines and nobody wanted to see. Who wanted to see two guys get in the ring for a main event, one guy take a fall and just hand the belt to somebody else? Think about that happening. And then they do it with Sting and Hogan at Halloween Havoc. And then they do it, I mean, to flip you off. And then they do it again with Jarrett and Hogan. They just continually have to like do this over and over and over again. If you're talking about him signing with WCW and you're bringing up how much money you make, why are they not talking about the creative control clause that WCW gave to Hogan? He kind of brought it up when he said you can go there and you can run the company. I think it just basically means you can run the storylines that you're involved in. He didn't care about what was going on with the cruiserweights or anybody else. He cared about what was going on with him. That's why he was able to get himself into this NWO thing. But we go from talking about the finger poke of doom thing to probably one of the biggest things in WCW that he did, Bash to the Beach. When Vince Russo comes out and basically throws Hulk Hogan out of the company, Hogan quits. he basically taps out on the documentary, saying that he just couldn't do it anymore. Where they're showing him getting beaten up by the New Blood. They never brought up um, him losing to the New Blood with Billy Kidman. I think he put over Billy Kidman 3 times, whether if it was on Nitro or on pay-per-view, where they really wanted Kidman to become like a main event star for the company. But um, shortly after that, the WCW company dies. They don't really bring up the fact why they died. That Turner gave up on the company and decided that they wouldn't give them TV anymore. And the only person that was there to buy a wrestling company without television was Vince McMahon. And Vince buys WCW. He calls up, Hogan, Hall, and Nash, and basically says that the Hollywood Hulk Hogan character is too big and he needs to bring it in. He needs to have a match with The Rock at WrestleMania 18. I don't know if that was the pitch right off the bat, but Hogan, Hall, and Nash, they come in February of 2002. I believe that, WrestleMania 18 is in April of 2002. So maybe like a pitch for the Rock WrestleMania match was something, honestly, that was in the cards. I've just never heard about it. So many people have talked about the fact that a Hogan versus Stone Cold Steve Austin match at WrestleMania 18 was talked about, but I don't know. I always kind of felt like they fell into the Rock match, but it makes a lot of sense for them to have that worked out when he comes into the company, because if you're coming in, the pay-per-view before WrestleMania, you should be knowing like what the heck you're doing at WrestleMania. The one thing about this Netflix documentary is they weren't able to get The Rock to show up for the doc. They had to use a recording of him talking. I believe it was on one of the Rock documentaries, talking about his own career, and he talks about how good the Hogan match was. He looks at it as being one of the best special nights in the wrestling business. But we get 2 things out of the WrestleMania 18 match: is that Hulk Hogan gets cheered over The Rock, and that basically Vince McMahon comes up with the idea of bringing back the red and yellow, thinking that he should have done it. We see clips of Hulk Hogan and his life, and Hogan says, honestly, if he could do it again, he would have quit everything at WrestleMania 18. He should have retired. He should have just gone to the house. He should have just never left it. Him and Linda probably could have fixed things up at this point because of the fact that they still have a good relationship. And then, him and the kids were younger and he could have been around. If he was smart, he stops right there. And that's basically where the episode ends. And we go into episode 4, which is entitled Terry Bollea versus Hulk Hogan, I believe. Hold on, I'm letting these dogs out so Max isn't whimpering anymore. 1 sec. Oh. Oh, chair. Alrighty, let's polish this bad boy up. Episode 4. We're going to start off with Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. Honestly, one of my very negative things about this documentary is it is entitled Hulk Hogan, Real American, the Netflix documentary. But it's really not a documentary on Hulk Hogan. And they spend almost every episode trying to get you to divide Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea. I understand you want people to watch this thing, but if you want to make a Terry Bollea documentary, entitle it Terry Bollea, but I think you're scared because if you don't title it Hulk Hogan, somebody might buy it, not buy it, and somebody might not watch it at the same time because Hulk Hogan is a much bigger name. I'm not saying that nobody knows who Terry Bollea is, but more than likely, there's a lot of wrestling fans that if you just started talking about Terry Bollea, you wouldn't even know who Hulk Hogan is. But we start out episode 4. We're back at the very beginning of the documentary, and Hogan is working out in his gym. We've clipped to it a couple times, but I think they just wanted to kind of like have this like completely come full circle, as in like Hulk is almost like reliving his life, reliving, telling his career while he's in the gym, doing his sets. Um, but we get a clip of the guy who made the actual documentary that we're watching. I wasn't able to get his name. He says he's a wrestling fan, and he says he just wanted to make this documentary. But this dude who made this doc, he says he doesn't even know Terry Bollea's name. He only knows him as Hulk Hogan. And I was so lost at this point. How you could point out, like, if I wanted to make a Triple H documentary tomorrow, and I wanted to make it, a 4-episode thing. I fly out. I'm talking to Triple H. I'm getting interviews. I'm going out and interviewing his friends. You don't think that it's ever going to come up as Paul? His name is Paul Levesque. I think that's crazy, and I don't even understand why this guy put himself in his own documentary to be saying this. But we left off right shortly after WrestleMania 18 in 2002, and Vince wanted to jump back onto the Hogan train. What's funny is Triple H is the guy who's like, I told Vince, no, this is a horrible idea. This is not what people want to see. I understand, nostalgia. You got this Hulk still rules thing. He's wearing the red and yellow again. But you don't need to be putting the title on this guy. He doesn't need to be the main guy of this company. They don't tell you, unless you were watching at that time or you really know the lineage of the championship. The reason why Triple H didn't want to do this, and he didn't tell you this, Triple H is the guy with the title. Triple H just came back from, of course, blowing out his quad. He wins the Royal Rumble. Then he goes to WrestleMania 18. He wrestles in a main event that most people don't think is a main event because of the fact that it came on after Rock versus Hogan. And Triple H, he's not in the spot that he's in now. But like, I completely understand why Triple H is like, no, don't give him the title because it's supposed to be his time. 2002, Stone Cold Steve Austin, is winding it down. We don't really know until WrestleMania 19 that, Stone Cold is done. But 2002, I think, we're going through Stone Cold Steve Austin taking his ball and going home because the fact that they don't really have anything for him after WrestleMania 18. He's supposed to wrestle that match that just got thrown out as the King of the Ring qualifier on Monday Night Raw. And he's like, there's no way in hell I'm doing that match because he doesn't want to lose to Brock. He doesn't want to give that match away for free. There's no buildup. It doesn't make any sense for him to do this job. I understand you're trying to build The Rock or Brock to beat The Rock at SummerSlam, but it just doesn't really make any sense. By the time we get to WrestleMania 19, they put Hulk Hogan in the ring against Vince McMahon. I don't think they do a really good story of telling why they did that match, of it being like, who is the guy to blame for wrestling being as big as it was? Would there be a Hulk Hogan without a Vince McMahon? Would there be a Vince McMahon without Hulk Hogan? We see clips of the match, but we don't really get a build up to getting there. They talk about, Hulk just getting old and just looking into the mirror. He talks about, the match against Shawn Michaels. They don't really bring up the fact that at least Shawn tells the story is that he had no problem losing to Hulk, but the plan was for them to do a 3-month string of matches to have a whole long, storyline to go along with it. But then all of a sudden, Hulk just says, I don't really like working with Shawn. I want to do this one match. I want to beat him, and then that's it. I want to just move on from that. So at that point, HBK thinks that he's getting screwed. So he just goes into full on Shawn Michaels assault mode. And he does the whole thing, just saying that it is like getting old, brother, with like him doing the fake Larry King skit. Then once we actually get to SummerSlam, which if you go back and watch, I believe it's SummerSlam '04, Shawn Michaels versus Hulk Hogan is the main event. We've got a young John Cena as champion on that show. I can't really remember anything else, but like that was one of the first SummerSlams that they kind of just put out there. Like, here's SummerSlam. You want to watch it, go watch it. I don't think they really believed that Hogan and Shawn would do the rating that it did, but a lot of people bought that show to see that match. And they got a match of just Shawn just over bumping, overselling, just trying to make a joke of the match with Hulk Hogan. And then what's even weirder is that they turned Shawn heel for that match and immediately turned Shawn babyface the next night on Raw with Chris Masters. Not getting really any payoff onto that match, just trying to make it like just go away as fast as they could. We have Hulk Hogan come back the next year for the match against Randy Orton. He wishes that he would have savored that time. He didn't really think that it was going to be his last WWF match, but he has a major fallout with the company. He basically just goes home. They can't really find a way to use him, so he's just sitting there, and he says one day the phone rings, and it's VH1, and they pitched the idea of Hogan Knows Best. And Hulk, he honestly likes the idea because he thinks that it's a way for him and Linda to get on the same page. He's been the superstar all of his life. If he's able to get Linda out there to get a little bit of taste of being a superstar, that then she would be on an even playing ground. At the same time, it would be able to boost Brooke Hogan, who has really these stars of being a singer, to being like the next Britney Spears. They're running with this storyline of like Hulk Hogan being like a show dad, trying to protect his daughter and put her into the right situations, where she can launch her career to be the superstar that he wants her to be. Linda really thinks that, because of this, they push out Hulk Hogan and we actually see the real Terry, which is really weird when it comes to like reality television. Most people think of it at all just being like extremely fake. But we see like the softer side of Hulk Hogan, the Hulk Hogan that she fell in love with. And, those first probably 2 years, there's really a boost in the Hulk Hogan family, where like the Hogan, the Boleas are all coming back together, but they blame the reality show. All 4 of them, is that basically around season 4, they're all together so much. There's a falling out in the family. Everybody's mad at everybody. They don't really have their own private time, and it comes out that Hulk Hogan cheated on Linda McMahon. Hulk Hogan cheated on Linda Hogan, Linda Bollea, however you think about it, when a housekeeper brings Linda an earring that she found in her bed that Linda says is not hers. Linda goes out, she files for divorce. Linda goes out, she gets like a younger boyfriend, somebody who's actually in school with Nick Hogan. At first, the guy tells Linda that she's 23, then says that I lied about being 23. Now I'm freaking 21. And then when it comes up to like they go to a bar and he can't get served, he has to come out and be like, I'm not really 21. I'm 19. It that wasn't enough for Linda to say like she can't do this. She stays with the guy. Hogan moves out. Linda keeps the house. Linda keeps the stuff. Hogan is living in an apartment. He's not slumming it. He's looking over the water. He's looking over the beach, but it's close enough to the house that he can like hear what's going on. Like when they fire up the boat, and like Linda and the boyfriend are going out on the boat. Linda makes it a common occurrence that they drive by Hulk. They'll park in front of his house. They do a really close cruise by so Hulk can see, and this drives Hogan crazy. And Hogan does an interview with the people at Rolling Stone, and somehow it comes up the quote, "I know why OJ did it. I can understand why OJ did what he did." And this is the start of a downfall of the first time in Hulk Hogan's career that people kind of throw up the hands like, wait a minute, you can't be saying stuff like that. And it starts like a downfall of, Hogan already feels like his life is falling apart. He's lost his wife. He's lost his house. He's lost all his possessions. And he starts falling into pills to kind of like calm his nerves and bring himself down to where I guess he's just not living into the reality. And at one point, one night, he ends up laying on the bathroom floor. He finds himself with a gun in his mouth, and lucky for us that he kind of like changed his mind, I guess you can say. That he didn't. I know in a different documentary, he credited Muhammad Ali's daughter as somebody that came and talked to him. And I think she was just in the right place at the right time. And she made him realize that there's something to turn it around. In this documentary, they make it seem like after that happened, I guess Hogan reaches out to Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff just comes to Florida and starts spending time with Hulk, like getting him back onto his, into his game. Through the divorce, Hulk Hogan ends up giving Linda McMahon 70% of their estate, just to get it over with. Just rip the Band-Aid off, not just, keep fighting and keep going to court. Just you take that, I'll take the rest. And Hulk is not able to maintain his normal lifestyle. And, TNA Wrestling, Dixie Carter, throws a lifeline out there, and basically Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan, they go to work for TNA. Hulk Hogan credits them for saving his life, basically just by, getting a paycheck. And he says that he actually went there to try and make it work. He went there to try and really help that company is what they were looking for. But in the end, TNA got Hulk for 3 matches. And I want to say, honestly, at least Hogan was there for 3 years. And he had a few good storylines. The biggest one was him coming in and us actually believing that he was going to make TNA into a real wrestling organization that was going to be able to go heads up, with WWE. I'll say this much. I believe it was in 2005 when Kurt Angle jumped. I really thought that they had a chance then, but they lost momentum, and Hogan coming in was something that really got it there. But Hulk made changes to the wrestling company that took their fans away. They were going in and changing the 6-sided ring to a 4-sided ring, so it would be just like everybody else. It kind of probably pushed away a lot of the TNA lifers that kind of like, this is what made it different, the X division and things like that. But after Hogan, wrestles, I believe, a match or 2 matches there, He goes in, he has hip replacement, he has knee replacement, he has a back surgery, and it's just more wear and tear on that body by trying to make it better. It's putting him into excess pain, trying to recover from the surgeries. And this is when the story of the day yesterday comes out. It's like around the time that Hogan was in TNA, he was, doing fentanyl to get through the day. Honestly, just by reading the headline, I thought it was like the fentanyl of today. I didn't realize that it was medical fentanyl, but he still was taking an abundance. He was putting 2 fentanyl things into his mouth on his upper lips to get him into his body. He had 2 like fentanyl. I think he called them like strips, I guess you can say, that he was putting on both of his calves to help his legs. He was just eating these candy lollipops that they were handing out at the freaking pharmacist, and he was going there to pick this stuff up. The pharmacist basically looked at him and was like, "This is enough stuff to kill anybody. How are you still here? How are you still alive? How are you you basically using this to get through your day?" But one day, when we're talking to Jeremy Borash in 2012, Jeremy Borash is in a meeting with Hulk. They're talking about what they're going to be doing, and Hulk answers the phone, and he has like this conversation where it's like, okay, all right. He hangs up the phone. He looks at Jeremy Borash and just says, "I guess Gawker is going to be releasing a sex tape of mine," and they're just just letting me know that it's just basically going to be coming out. From there, we're touching in on that Hulk Hogan versus Gawker documentary that was made on Netflix just a little bit ago. We have an interview with the guy that was the lawyer for the Hulk Hogan case. They don't really go into the fact that Hulk Hogan didn't pay for this lawsuit. They don't really talk about the fact that when Hulk Hogan wins this lawsuit and is awarded $140 million, they don't even talk about the fact that Gawker doesn't have the money to pay Hogan the $140 million. They don't talk about the fact that the person who was funding this lawsuit was actually trying to take down Gawker and Deadspin, as in like, I've got a lot of money to burn. I need to take this company down, because they wrote an article, making that person look bad. And this was a way for him to get back at them. We don't really hear any of that. But that sex tape is released in 2012. And in 2015, when this court case is all said and done, I don't know how that sex tape gets into the right people's hands, I guess you can say, that want to release this, which I think was the National Enquirer. It might have been TMZ, but it comes out that Hulk Hogan says the thing about Brooke Hogan dating, I think it was a black rapper, and he uses a racial slur, and it's a whole thing of like, why don't you go out with a Dallas Cowboy? Like, why you got to go out with this guy? Just horrible words, horrible timings. And basically it's all the downfall of that coming out. And Triple H, he talks about the fact that he's the guy that had to pick up the phone and he had to fire Hulk Hogan. But he says it in a weird way that, like, we didn't fire Hulk Hogan, we fired Terry Bollea, which goes into the whole thing of like, if this is like a Hulk Hogan documentary, call it Hulk Hogan. If this is Terry Bollea, like, you're trying to really split hairs on, like, it's not Hulk Hogan, the guy who said the N word. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? But I can honestly say, as a mega Hulkamaniac, I never heard Hulk Hogan say the words that he was sorry, and I still have not seen them, heard them. They released a statement after it that Hulk said he was embarrassed and he feels bad for anybody that he's hurt. Why couldn't Hulk just say it? They showed him going on interview after interview, trying to clear his name because of the fact that, um, he's kind of was blackballed by everything. Like he couldn't go back to TNA. He had just been fired by WWF. Like I'm sure at one point he was kind of like thinking, like, what the hell am I gonna do? This is a guy that just a few years ago went to go work for a wrestling company that was kind of like an embarrassment to the wrestling world at the time because of the fact that he said he was going broke. He had given away 70% of his net worth to Linda in a divorce. And he just was majorly going through a huge downfall. And they bring up the fact that during this time is when he meets his wife, Sky. And I start immediately going like, wait a minute. Sky is not wife number 2. Sky is wife number 3. I don't know why they don't talk about wife number 2 at all. The only person who brought up wife number 2, not even using her name, was Sky, who brought up the fact that when they met, he was currently going through his second divorce. And I'm just like, why are we not? It's kind of like when you talk about Ric Flair's marriages and divorces. Like he's had so many of them, it's hard to even remember all of them that went down. But it was so funny because Hogan's second wife was somebody who looked just like freaking Linda. But he meets Sky. Sky takes him to church. He becomes a born again Christian. He gets baptized. He talks about the fact that in 2018, him and WWE were able to come back together and bring him back to the company. They don't bring up the fact that the way they kind of snuck him in the back door was bringing him to Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia so that he wouldn't have the American backlash of, of being there. They don't bring up the fact that the first time they use him at Madison Square Garden, I believe, in New York, is when they do the rest in peace Mean Gene Okerlund. And they're like, there's no way they're going to boo Hulk Hogan as he's eulogizing Mean Gene Okerlund, who is a wrestling hero. And they kind of cheat the system to meet Naked Man. Now, honestly, I don't know how to talk about this. I'm just going to bring this up really fast. There's people out there that love this man. There's people out there that hate this man. I don't think there's even anybody really in the middle. How the hell did they get Donald Trump on this Hulk Hogan documentary? I know that Hulk Hogan went to the convention and he did the speech and he tore the shirt and basically said he couldn't, keep his mouth shut anymore after they tried to take, Donald Trump out, and he had always been a Donald Trump supporter, and he just didn't know how to use his voice because he was always trying to be politically correct. They have Donald Trump do an interview in today's date, and Donald Trump comes into the room and sits down, and I believe the words he says is like, I should be talking to the Russians right now, but I'm talking to you. What the hell's going on, man? I love Hulk Hogan. He's one of my heroes of the world. But if the president of the United States is anybody, I don't care if it's Barack Obama, I don't care if it's the other George Bush, I don't care if it's Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy. If they walk in the room and they're like, hey, I should be talking to the Russians right now, but let's get down to business and talk about Hulk Hogan and WrestleMania 4 or WrestleMania 5. That's just batshit crazy. But boom, we'll move on from there. Hogan was trying to find his authentic and true self, and that's why he kind of like came out in the political world saying what he needed to say. We go to the Netflix premiere, and this is honestly where I would have ended the documentary. I think I would have ended the documentary even before the political stuff. But I think they showed this to kind of show what the backlash was from doing the convention and pushing Donald Trump. Is that it's in Los Angeles, it's a blue state. Hogan comes out and they boo the crap out of him. They really make it seem like it's because of his political background, endorsing Donald Trump at the convention, that everybody wanted to boo him. This is another place that he could have taken ownership for what he said in 2012. This is 2025, 13 years later, and just said, hey, I said some stuff. I haven't won anybody over. Maybe I should, make some more apologies. Maybe I should take Mark Henry up on his offer to, go out and talk to some students in the black community at black colleges around the world. And I'm not even saying that Hogan couldn't have charged money to do those talks. He could have made money on that tour, but he just chose not to do it because he was Hulk Hogan. And honestly, in my world, I think he was a little bit lazy when it comes to that. All you got to do is just say you're sorry. I make mistakes all the time. But we get Booker T talking about Hulk Hogan, which is like kind of bittersweet. Everybody knows why, but they're not going to say it. They acted like they just wanted to interview Booker T. Booker T was a guy that, yeah, he was with Hulk Hogan a long part of his career. Yeah, he said the thing about Hulk Hogan way back in the day in WCW. But if you're not going to ask him the question, what's the point of Booker T being there? Like, just ask him honestly, what do you feel about this man? And maybe Booker T's like, we made a lot of money. I know that he's like really behind the scenes. I don't think what he said was real, but I don't know. Just ask the man what he really feels about it. He sat that on his podcast. I bet you Booker T would rake Hulk Hogan through the coals. That's just it. But then again, like they're in the NXT arena doing the interview, so maybe he felt like he couldn't do it. I don't know. We get a question about when was Hulk Hogan the happiest, and he talks about Linda being the mom, keeping that family together when he had 2 young kids. I will tell you the truth. When I talk about Linda Hogan, I say a lot of negative things. I've laughed at her videos when she was yelling at the Instagram video that she put up years ago when she was yelling at all the birds in her house, talking about all the wrongs that Hulk Hogan had done to her, but she still loved Hulk, and I thought that she was batshit crazy. I think she was the MVP of this documentary. And I wonder, honestly, they tell a really good story of Hulk and Linda, being the reason for true love. And maybe if they could have found some way to get it back on the tracks before the divorce, maybe if they wouldn't have done the reality show and kept pushing the envelope and, making it worse and worse, maybe they could still be in love like they were back in the 1980s. But Linda Hogan, the I want to be a reality star before reality is even a thing. Those home movies were freaking huge. And I don't even really know what this documentary would be without Linda. So, basically I give all the props in the world to her. But we go to July 24th, 2025. Hulk Hogan was 71 and he died. Basically, he was going into the hospital for some heart stuff that they were just basically trying to get in there and just trying to figure out. He was in really like a bad way since he had a neck surgery and he never really was able to fully recover from that. And he passed away. Jesse Ventura really said it best when talking about how he felt about Hulk Hogan passing away. And I've talked about Jesse a lot during this documentary series, is the fact that Jesse's a guy who, if he wants to say something negative about Hulk Hogan, he's going to say it. I don't think he's going to change his mind because of Hulk Hogan has passed away. He said a lot of stuff in his life that was very negative about Hulk when they still worked in the same company, whether if that was in WCW, whether if that was in WWF. Jesse knows that it's him that, just flat out told on him for trying to start the union in WWF. And Hogan felt like that was going to hurt him in the long run if everybody was kind of getting paid the same. And he went and told Vince, and Vince, shut down the union talk. But then, Jesse Ventura went off and he started making movies. He got his insurance and stuff that way to the point where he just told Vince, like, hey, I tried to help. They don't want my help. I'm good. But Jesse Ventura said it was the end of it's the end of his era with Hulk passing away. And it really made him feel mortal that you can't take this thing really for granted. But they show the way that WWE reacted to Hulk Hogan passing away with um, the day after Triple H kind of pulling everybody in and basically saying like that Hulk had passed away and they're going to do a 10 bell salute. It doesn't, the way that Triple H said it best is the best way for any wrestling fan. You got to think that that company is not going to be the same if there is no Hulk Hogan. Whether you feel that he has done anything wrong to you or to anybody else, you can't take away the man's accomplishments and what he did for that company. The guy main evented WrestleMania 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We can say that basically he didn't main event WrestleMania 4. I'll take that back. But that Andre versus Hogan rematch that was in round 2 was definitely one of the real strong selling points for people to buy that pay-per-view because nobody knew that it was going to be Macho Man versus Ted DiBiase in the finals. And also it's Hulk Hogan and Andre that come out during that match to stir up interest of like, oh shit, business is picking up. And that's what kicked off the Mega Powers angle with Miss Elizabeth bringing Hogan out to help Randy Savage. But Triple H says that Hulk Hogan at one point probably was one of the most recognizable men on the planet. We finally see our first sight of Vince McMahon at the funeral. Vince had a few quotes, and they decided not to use video with those quotes. I don't know if that was just negative response to Vince McMahon, that they felt like they couldn't put him out there, but they did the same thing with The Rock, talking about WrestleMania 18. And Vince leads everybody to do a standing ovation for Hulk at the funeral. It really reminded me of Bruce Pritchard on his podcast, always doing the like, why did we do this to end a pay-per-view? Oh, because Hulk must pose. That's the only way to end the show. Is with Hogan out there, doing all of the things. In my mind, I honestly think the legend of Hulk Hogan will live forever. And he is one of the biggest superstars of all time. I really hope that as a wrestling fan in the current state, I hope that Cody Rhodes, Oba Femi, Javon Evans, Trick Williams, Ethan Page. I really hope that one of them becomes bigger than ever for Hulk Hogan. I want everybody in this world to enjoy professional wrestling because of how much I enjoy it. I know what it was like during the Attitude Era because I lived it when I was flipping back and forth channel to channel. And I don't care what you think about today's war of WWE versus AEW. I don't care what you think of the past war with TNA versus WWE. They've gotten close. They've never got to what that was. The Attitude Era was a whole nother angle of just basically two shows fighting against each other, trying to be better than each other. They can't, do a bad segment because if somebody changes the channel, they might not change it back. And that's what I want. I know I was about to say like that's what I want for my kids. My kids don't care about wrestling. They never will. But I want the kid next door. That sounds weird that I care about the kid next door, but I want some kid out there to be able to watch professional wrestling the same way that I did. Because if you think that WWE is closing up shop within the next 10 years, you're out of your mind. They're going to be doing this wrestling thing for a long time. But the last words of this documentary was Hulk Hogan doing an interview. I think it was at WrestleMania 7. And I don't know if it was like just a blooper that they just saved throughout the years, but I've never seen it before. But all of a sudden, Hulk Hogan does like this blooper face, like he messed up to Mean Gene, and then they just book Bugs Bunny versus Daffy Duck at WrestleMania. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard, but it didn't really make any sense to me. But that was it on the documentary. That was the 4 episodes. My final thoughts on the Hulk Hogan documentary. I think it was awesome that Hulk Hogan is going to live on the main page of Netflix, probably for, let's say, about the next month before it falls off. And there's another documentary and another crime documentary. And then they put up some old TV show and it just gets pushed way to the back to where you can find it if you search for it, but it's never going to pop up like, hey, things you might have missed or things that you might want to watch. It's not going to be on the top 10 after about, the first few days of this documentary. I will say that honestly, as a wrestling fan, that somebody that like, hey, I remember Hulk Hogan when I was a kid, people are going to flip on this documentary to see what it is about. I I really wonder if my mom, who watches almost everything on Netflix, she probably has Netflix on half of the time that she's watching television, whether she's yelling at the TV about political news that she doesn't want to hear or whatever the hell's going on. She when I've been around her, she always has something on Netflix on. I wonder if this is something that would interest her, knowing how much I care about professional wrestling, that she would flip this on. I think the first episode is enough to kill anybody's intrigue because it doesn't jump into Hulk Hogan as we know of Hulk Hogan. It is the buildup of Hulk Hogan. And if you know anything about, what it's like to start to train to become a professional wrestler, what it's like before you're in WWF, which is the start of episode 2, I think it's enough to be like, maybe we'll just watch a rerun of Seinfeld or something like that. But Hulk Hogan, he is one of the biggest professional wrestlers of all time. He is one of the biggest stars. I believe that Hulk Hogan deserves a Hulk Hogan documentary. Whether they do that on Peacock, they just did the Shawn Michaels documentary. I don't know how they do their documentary deals or if WWE makes them and sells them. But in episode 4, we got that very weird interview with the guy who said he was the director of this documentary, who didn't even know Hulk Hogan's real name. Why are you doing a Hulk Hogan documentary? But I would love to not hear about Terry Bollea, but just hear about Hulk Hogan and the conquest of his career, whether it's like kayfabe, talking about him and Mr. T hooking up. I still want an answer to the question, why didn't Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff wrestle at WrestleMania 1? Why was it Bob Orton? Especially with a lot of the buildup that they were showing, it kept on talking about Orndorff and Piper. Did Orndorff just get hurt? And they just replaced him on the fly and they just used him as like an outside guy because of his name, and that's why they brought in Jimmy Snuka. It's really weird that Snuka didn't wrestle at WrestleMania and just was on the outside of that match because of how big Jimmy Snuka was. Before Hulk Hogan there, it was like Jimmy Snuka was one of the biggest stars, even though Bob Backlund was the guy that was the champion at the time. But I don't really even know what to talk about other than this documentary. As a wrestling fan, was not good. I was warned a few times after I made my first video as like a reminder, like, hey, the Hogan thing is getting released today. This is some of the news that's coming out of this documentary. This is what I'm excited to see. But DS, shoot, how do I say your name? Glable? I apologize. But he just says it's not worth watching. There was another comment here, same thing. Doc was for the casual fan. I don't know because of how much stuff they really skipped. Because like when you're not talking about WrestleMania 4, you don't bring up the fact that they took the championship off of him, and it's the first time not being the champion, and Randy Savage is carrying the belt, and that leads to WrestleMania 5. Hogan vs. Savage is one of the biggest matches in the history of WWF. And I understand they just put Hogan versus Andre into the Hall of Fame, and they're probably going to want to go with something next year out of the newer generation, like they did the first time with Austin, Brett, and Shamrock. But like, I would think that Savage versus Hogan is a great Hall of Fame match to put into there because as big as Hulk Hogan was, there's a lot of people who came in to wrestling because of Macho Man Randy Savage, and that's why he is the star that he was out there in professional wrestling. I know that in the end, they talked about, Hogan Knows Best. I thought Hogan Knows Best was an all right TV show. Series 1 and Series 2 had good episodes. Him getting brought back to WWF, being put in the Hall of Fame at WrestleMania 21 is definitely one of my favorite episodes. But I truly believe that I think Hulk and Linda could have fixed their situation if the reality show was not a thing, where you're always trying to push the storylines and them doing arguments. And a reality show is a scripted show. You have to have some sort of fighting on the show. And I think that them just starting, it just snowballs into something bigger and bigger, to the point where it was irreplaceable. Now, I don't know why Hogan cheated on Linda. They didn't tell the story about past problems that came up. Hogan's told the story about basically he was at the grocery store with him and Linda early on in their career. And Hogan, when he was walking by the front of the store, realized that he was on the cover of the National Enquirer. And the National Enquirer was running a story that Hulk Hogan was in a relationship with, I believe, like Miss America or Miss USA. And it could have been a complete flabbergast story. But Hogan says that he went to the front of the store and he grabbed all of the National Enquirers. He bought them and he threw them away. So Linda wouldn't find out about this. Now, Hogan didn't deny the story, like, hey, I didn't do this, but he made sure that Linda didn't find out. But that probably wasn't the only grocery store run that Linda was going to make that week. So did Hogan have to keep going to the store every day to make sure that Linda didn't see this? And plus, like Linda's best friend, like Mary or whatever her name is, the next door neighbor, even like somebody who didn't really like Linda that much, they probably just wanted to try to drag her through the mud. You don't think that one of them saw the National Enquirer and decided to show Linda or made sure that she knew about it? Like, I don't know. That story just doesn't really make a lot of sense. But at least Hogan didn't tell the Hulk Hogan lies. They didn't talk about Metallica. They didn't talk about, Hogan didn't know what Andre was going to do at WrestleMania 3, if he was actually going to let him beat him or if he was just going to sit on him and pin him and they were going to make Andre the champion. Everybody knows, or everybody's got a favorite lie along the way. I really wish that there are time periods of Hogan's career that they really would have talked about more. I think there was bigger matches in his career that really got left out, that they just sort of just moved on to the next one. President Donald Trump showing up, honestly, was a really big surprise that they're friends, they have a relationship, whatever it is. Him doing the doc was something like a really big surprise, but maybe like Hogan doing the convention was a really big favor. And at one point, I don't remember who it was. I know it wasn't Jesse Ventura for sure, but somebody said that Hulk was such a big star that he got to pick the president, which I don't really think he did, but I don't really remember who said it either. But if you are a wrestling fan to the same level that I am, and you have not watched this documentary and it's 24 48 hours later, whatever it is, after it's been released, I'm not telling you not to watch it, but I'm just saying that Hulk Still Rules might be a better doc. And that came out in like 2002 to 2003. I don't know if it lives on ESPN or you're going to have to find a DVD player to fire up, or maybe it's on YouTube or something like that somebody sort of ripped it and put it up. But this doc wasn't great. It wasn't good. It is what it is. And we'll end it with that. So hopefully everybody has a good day. We're about 25 minutes from the NFL draft. Hope everybody's team out there finds success, finds their next pick. I know that my buddy Miguel is going to be picking a quarterback #1. I don't know. The last thing I saw this morning was the Niners were thinking about drafting a wide receiver. I would think, honestly, hopefully we make a trade, we move up. I don't really know what we need help with the most other than offensive line help. We signed Trent Williams for 2 years. I don't really know if he's going to play both of those years, and I don't really know what the plan is after those 2 years, but we have a very short window to win. I've said this each and every year. We gotta win. Let's just put it like that. So peace out, everybody. Go Niners. Must have luck. Tonight is all about dreams with the NFL draft. So let's get some started. Peace out, guys.